Are you curious about the wines of the Languedoc region in southern France and how they differ from the neighboring region of Roussillon and other French regions? How has the fascinating history of this region differed greatly from those of others in France? And why is the Languedoc a hotbed of experimentation, as our guest says? And what does that mean for the wines you drink? Well, tonight you're going to get those tips and stories and more with our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. If you're joining us on the recording, please get in the comments and type recording or what's in your glass or what the weather is. And of course, if you're here with me on the live stream, I want to hear from you as well. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online wine and food pairing courses, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, this recording is based on, or this video is based on a recording I made for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk, but during this live stream, I will be here in the chat area with you live and responding. So get in there. Let us know what stories and tips you're enjoying, what questions you still have, and so on. All right, and just before I introduce our guest, let me say that two of you will win a copy of her terrific book, The Wines of the Languedoc. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose two people randomly from those who contact me. All right. Back to our guest. Rosemary George has been in the wine industry for 52 years. She passed the prestigious Master of Wine exam in 1979, making her one of the first women to do so. In 1981, she started writing about wine as a freelancer and has subsequently authored 14 books, including those on New Zealand, Tuscany, Chablis, Fougères, the Languedoc, and Roussillon. And she joins us now from her home in London, England. Welcome, Rosemary. We're so glad you could be here with us.
Great to be here, Natalie. Nice to meet you online.
All right. Yeah, exactly. This is how most of us meet these days, it seems.
It's good to put a face to the name, you know.
Exactly. All right, so first, before we dive into the Languedoc, as one of the first women in the world to become a Master of Wine, how did that shape your perspective on the wine industry, or how you wrote about it, or any other aspect you want to mention?
Well, I fell into the wine trade as a secretary, lured into the wine trade by an offer of a job as a secretary, plus a glass of the Wine Society champagne. They're the largest, longest, oldest mail order company, well, it was mail order company, obviously now email company in England. And I'd been an enthusiastic member of London University's Wine Society. So wine seemed to go a good career, but as a secretary, I worked out pretty quickly I was not suited to secretarial work. So the Master of Wine for me was an escape, prove yourself. And women had to prove themselves then. The wine trade was very male-dominated back in the 70s.
Right, absolutely. And that's quite the way to prove yourself. As we know, the pass rate for that exam is notoriously low, like 10%. It's very, very difficult.
Well, the trouble is about the exam is that you have to write as well as taste. So there are people who are good at writing essays and people who are brilliant tasters who cannot write an essay to save their lives. But see, the two skills are needed. So I think that's what makes it particularly challenging.
It does.
But I hate we do the exam now because you have to write a dissertation as well. That would be...
Oof. I'm sure you do well with all those books. So how did your journey into wine writing begin then?
Well, I was sacked, quite simply. Before it was fashion.
Okay. Well, that'll do it.
I worked for a small, one-man band wine merchant, and he realised quite quickly I was not what he needed, and he was quite right. And 30 years old, I did admit to him that sacking me was the best career move I ever made, because that's
what
led to writing. I thought, I'll get another job, but I didn't. But I got a book contract with 2 phone calls.
Oh, wow. That's extraordinary.
The really good thing that happened was that the first time my husband was made redundant from the city, he's very civilised, sent off to do, see a placements agent, he helped you plan your career. And this woman who became a great friend did the psychometric assessments on Christopher, and he very cheekily said, could Rosemary come and see you too? I walk in to see her, we've not met before. I've hardly sat down before she says to me, the first thing I have to say, don't ever get another office job ever again. You're a complete disaster in office. I went, wow, license to play.
I often say I'm too feral for an office. I could never work.
I couldn't believe it, just for ticking these boxes. And then she went on to say that I actually had a very good profile for a self-employed person because I was highly motivated and responded to deadlines. And then that I
there you
was
go.
not especially imaginative, so I haven't got a novel in my head, but I'm quite creative, so I can write about something I know. So
Interesting. The
with that,
difference
I came
between
up
creative
with
and imaginative.
yes,
Yeah.
it's quite interesting. Sort of yes, it's a difference of perspective. So that's
Terrific.
So that's kind of how it all happened, really.
All right. Well, great. And so I know you've written other books, but what prompted your initial fascination with the Languedoc region? And maybe paint a picture for us as to where you were, what triggered the idea for this book.
Well, my first book, Chablis, was published, and I wrote the launch party. Julian Jeffs, who was the QC, or now KC, comes up to me and asks me legally phrased questions about how he's going to be spending the next few months, years, whatever. And he said, "I'll come clean. I would like you to write French country wines for Faber and Faber, prestigious publishers, T.S. Eliot." And I thought, oh, wow. So of course immediately I said yes, not thinking that French country wines actually entailed a hell of a lot of France. It's everything that wasn't Bordeaux, Burgundy, Loire, Champagne and the Rhone. And of course the Languedoc formed a large part of that. So I was going to the Languedoc at the end of the 1980s when things were starting to happen. It was very much dominated by cooperatives still at that time. But there were...
And by cooperatives, so many growers contributing to a centralized winery facility. Yeah.
Yes, it's very much that system. But there were some, interesting individual wine growers. And so that I suppose triggered my... And I can remember actually the last meeting I had for French country wines, and I was about to get the night train from Narbonne to Paris. So I had lunch with a woman called Claude Viellard, who at that stage she was the export director for Vignon Val d'Aubieux, large group of cooperatives and in the Languedoc. And we actually talked about the fact there was a book to be written. But then there was a bit of a pause. I got around to doing that, which was French, the wines of the south of France, which are Bagnols to Belly. So from the first vineyard in France after Spain and the last vineyard before you go into Italy. And that's really what led to my real interest in the Languedoc, was researching that. And also led to
so that's a huge...
there. It's a huge
Absolutely.
area.
That's a huge area. Like, draw us a map visually. Like, how big is it compared to other French regions? Where is it on the map in southern France?
The Languedoc, so this is going to be precisely the Languedoc. So French country wines covered Roussillon and Provence as well. A few years later, I wrote the Languedoc. So that starts, it's the three department of the Aude, the Hérault, and part of the Gard. So city-wise, you're going from Carcassonne in the west through to Nîmes in the east. So it's a kind of amphitheatre of the middle of France and the Mediterranean coast, where the main cities would be Carcassonne, Narbonne, Béziers, Montpellier, and then Nîmes.
How big is it geographically?
Yes, geographically, God, I just seem to think of in kilometres. I couldn't really say. I was actually before this podcast trying to look up to get an up-to-date figure for how many hectares of vineyards. Of course, you go online and nothing's dated. I'm going to say it's at least 200,000 hectares, but it is declining.
Wow, that's huge.
It is huge. I mean, they say, it's larger than Bordeaux, it's larger than Australia, it's larger than umpteen other countries' total production.
Oh,
so
my goodness, huge. Wow.
And with a sort of significant quality range, and there's a very big, there's top quality and very basic.
And we're going to get into that for sure, the changes and so on. So can you recount one really memorable experience from your early visits to the Languedoc that
I suppose
sort of
early
hinted?
I was trying to think about these things, what actually stands out. Well, I suppose going to see Master Domas Gassac, which was one of the pioneers. I mean, Aimé Guibert bought this property as a holiday house and then was told he got fantastic soil, and being Aimé, he thought, got to do something about this. And he had the chutzpah to ask a price that was higher than any of the other wines. In a restaurant wine list, you kind of saw Master Domas Gassac about 10 times more expensive than anybody else, and think, wow, why? But you could understand, he was making a statement saying these wines are of great quality, which they were, and he was a sort of pioneer. Then I suppose I have a memory of tasting with Georges Bertrand, who was Gérard Bertrand's father.
Right.
And he was one of the pioneers of putting wine in barrel. And he gave me a vertical tasting of 10 vintages of his Corbière from 1978 to 1988. And you think, yes.
Wow. What did they do before then if they weren't barreling it?
Oh, they had the very large barrels. That's what they call the foudre, which are really...
Okay.
Or, you've got cement vats.
Right.
Steel, fiberglass, whatever. But actually, for the Languedoc, to put wine in a barrel was, that was quite pioneering in the late 80s.
Oh, wow. And I heard there's a story about Georges and Gérard Bertrand where Gérard had to convince his father if he was going to take over the winery, it was going to be his name on the label, not his father's. I
Oh,
don't know if
right.
that's true
Oh,
or
I
not,
didn't know,
but
'cause George was killed in a car accident. So actually,
oh, I
Gerard took
see.
over very suddenly. So it
Oh,
might not have
okay.
known.
Maybe that's not
He,
correct.
he made his. I mean, he made his name as first of all, he was a international rugby player,
Yeah,
which is
he'd be a
extraordinary. I mean, you think
fascinating
now, and
person.
he's gone on to be one of the sort of key people in the Languedoc.
Absolutely. And I was just talking about his wine for something else I was doing. And over the past 20 years, he's converted all 17 estates to biodynamic farming.
And he's
So,
very
way
passionate
beyond
about that.
organic.
Yes.
That is incredible. It's an expensive process. It's time consuming, but that's an amazing feat for such a large collection of wineries under his umbrella
But
to
you could
all
say, I
be
mean, the Languedoc
biodynamic.
does have a lot of advantages for organic viticulture because you have the winds. So if it rains, the winds dry everything up pretty quickly. So
Dry the grapes so that there's less
I'll
rot
dry the
or
leaves.
less
So
risk.
the rot is not usually a problem in the Languedoc. Having said that, it can be because I think the vintages are becoming more irregular than they were. But certainly, it's a
Huh.
hell of a lot easier to be organic in the Languedoc than it is, say, Chablis.
Okay, okay. And the winds, is the Mistral one of them? The
It's a
big wind?
Mistral, it's a Tramontane. Um,
Okay.
that, it's a drying north wind. Then you get the vent marin, the wind, the sea winds, and those are the ones that bring humidity. But normally, it's a north wind that's drying.
Dry. Yeah, I've heard the Mistral can drive people crazy. It's so
Yes.
relentless. It
Yes.
just,
And then, yes, they always say this about the Aude department. It's windier in the Aude than in the Hérault. And then you get down into the Pyrénées Orientales of Roussillon, it's even windier. And it
oh
really
wow.
can, the winds can be very fierce.
Okay,
200
okay.
kilometres an hour is not unknown. Which,
And so tell us in a nutshell what this book is about, what makes it different from, say, other books, if they exist, on the Languedoc.
yes, I'm not sure. The only other, I was thinking about who else has written upon the Languedoc? Paul Strang. And I think, I mean, but so my starting point was really having written about the south of France at the end of the last century. I wanted to concentrate on the Languedoc, what's happening in this century. So I wrote about quite a lot of the new producers who had happened, who have set up since, to say, 2000. I cover the whole of the Languedoc, and that goes from Malpère, Cabadès, and Limoux, which are all around Carcassonne, and that's where the Languedoc is actually very precisely defined. Then as you move west, you get to Nîmes, it becomes much more blurred because you've got Costières and Nîmes are actually part of the Rhône Valley, but you've got Pays de Cévennes, which is in the Languedoc, whereas the parallel appellation Duché d'Uzès is part of the Rhône Valley administratively, so that's all a bit blurred. But for me, the heart of the Languedoc is, if you like, Corbière, Minervois, Fougères, Saint-Chinian, Pic Saint-Loup, that sort of, and the vineyards around Montpellier.
Right, those are important appellations. What
And
makes them
that's another good one that shouldn't be forgotten.
okay? And what makes them so important to the Languedoc? Is it because where they are geographically? Is it because the wines are really representative of the
I
Languedoc
suppose they're the
as a
wines
whole?
they're representative of the Languedoc. I mean, they use the classic grape varieties of the Languedoc and come up with Languedoc, spicy Languedoc flavours, and they are the heart of the Languedoc.
Right. And the classic grapes being Carignan.
Well, for red wine, you've got Grenache, Mourvèdre, Syrah, Carignan, and Cinsault. And then
Okay,
white
big
wines have a
reds.
bit more variety,
Yeah.
yes. But
Yeah.
Syrah and Mourvèdre were great varieties that were planted in the 70s, 80s as what they called the cépage améliorateur, the improving grape varieties. It was thought that the Carignan needed to have something else added to it. Now I think there's a trend, people realise how good Carignan is, especially in sort of, with climate change coming into effect, that it actually
Because
does
it
very
needed
well.
more
If
warmth
it's
for
treated
ripening?
properly in the vineyard and the yields are not too high, it will make some really good wine.
And
But so,
how would you describe typical Carignan? You said spicy?
yes, I think there's a little bit of spice, a bit of red fruit. There's a bit of freshness. There's some acidity and as well as tannin and some some freshness.
And how do you define freshness? That's a word I hear a lot and I like it, but I find it like
Well, how do
people have
I
different
think to me
definitions.
it's a lift on the finish.
Okay.
There's a kind of
Like
acidity lift.
refreshing.
Yeah, and it leaves you wanting another glass or another taste.
Sure.
How about that?
Well, a lot of wines do that. I don't
Yes,
know if they're all
exactly.
fresh for me, but
But wine
have more of
finishes.
that.
If it's heavy, you're less
Right.
you're less charmed by it.
Okay. Oh, that's a good definition. Um, and you also talk very evocatively about garrigue.
For the Garrigues, which is
Tell us what
veggie
that
dish.
is and how it comes through.
Well,
in
the
the
Garrigue
wines?
it's the scrubland of the shrubs of the Languedoc. So it's herbs, it's things like rosemary, juniper, thyme. There's lots of sort of small vegetation. A lot of in sisters. In May you will get the hillsides will be flower with lots of sisters. And there's kind of they're quite plants with quite a lot of scent, and so there's kind of they find their way into, I think, in my mind, into the wines of the Languedoc, and with the warm sunshine, of course, it's quite the smells come off so it's
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And how does the Languedoc's sort of maritime climate compared to inland areas? Like,
Well,
how
you've
does that
got
affect?
coastal plains, which of course were developed very much when phylloxera hit, and they were trying, perhaps, there was sort of flood irrigation to try and kill off the phylloxera louse, and of course, it's easy cultivation. So with that, a lot of the vineyards on the higher up altitude were given up, but now, of course, there's a trend to moving back up into the hills, which is where the appellation Terrasse du Larzac comes into play, because that was it's a new appellation which includes villages that in 1985, when the Côte du Languedoc appellation was created, they were deemed to be too cool. Now, of course, with people looking for freshness, you want cooler climate, and the same you can say
Right.
about Pic Saint-Loup again. It's one of the cooler, more northern bits of the Languedoc.
Huh, and now they're coming into their own as things
Yes.
warm up. Terraces, I've heard that. Does that mean terraces?
Terrace,
Or
yes, it's the terraces.
terraces. Okay, because vineyards are often planted on terraced vineyards,
Yes,
like
there's not. I
graduated.
mean, there probably were the remains of old terrace vineyards, and yes, that a lot of those terraces have probably disappeared.
Okay.
They are,
And how would... Sorry?
No, I was. I don't know what I was going to say now.
Oh, no, that's okay. So how would you define the Languedoc's identity compared to Roussillon? They're often grouped
yes,
together.
I always, when I started, I realised both books, both Roussillon, because Roussillon was my last book, and Languedoc.
Roussillon, okay.
They are completely different, because Roussillon
Okay.
was part of Spain until the Treaty of the Pyrenees, was it 1659?
Okay.
And the Languedoc is French. I mean, Roussillon speaks Catalan. They see themselves as Northern Catalonia. That the Pyrenees for Roussillon is a unifying thing. It does not divide them from Spain. It unites them. Whereas Languedoc speaks Occitan, and it has a different history. And the wine, because the key grape variety of Roussillon is Grenache, and that was also used for vin doux naturel. There's very much a tradition for vin doux in Roussillon, which you have very much less in the Languedoc. And the Languedoc is
And
basically
vin doux is what, for those who don't know?
fortified wines that like Banyuls and Maury and Rivesaltes.
Okay.
Wonderful
So
wines. If you don't know
fortified
about
sweet
those,
wine.
they're the ones that matured in barrel and glass for years. Old, Rivesaltes, delicious. One of the great wines in the world, and totally underappreciated. Whereas the Languedoc doesn't have that tradition to the same extent.
Okay. Roussillon. I've got to remember how to pronounce that because it has two L's in it, but we don't say the
I've
L's,
just come back from
obviously.
Argentina where they say double L. Suddenly this new grape variety, Semillon, as opposed to Semillon. Kind of
Oh, interesting.
Double L's can be pronounced in different ways. But
It's good to know, especially if you want to say it correctly in a restaurant without looking illiterate, although I'm sure lots of people stumble over those kinds of,
Yes.
double consonants. And how would the wines of the Languedoc differ from, say, other Mediterranean wine regions along southern Italy and Spain?
Well, I think completely different grape varieties. Though having said that, of course, Grenache and Carignan come up, their origins are Spanish. Mm-hmm. But I suppose it's climate. Yes, different. I mean, I think Italy, there's the one link with Mediterranean Italy would be Vermentino, or Roll as you're supposed to call it in France.
Okay, and that's a white grape, right?
That's a white grape variety. But southern Italy, it's things like Nero d'Avola and Primitivo and things. Whereas
Right.
I
Yeah,
would
from
think
the
also
islands.
probably, I think it says Spain as being probably richer, more alcohol. If you think like Priorat is more oak, perhaps.
Stronger oak aging tradition for
Possibly,
sure in
yes.
Spain.
I don't really know very much about Spain, I have to say, so I'm probably going to say.
You're staying in your lane. No problem. Share with us maybe one of the most interesting winemakers you met in the region.
Well, I pondered that question. I'm having great difficulty deciding who I would choose. I mean, I could go for friends. There's a lovely woman in Fougères, Catherine Rock, but she's a great friend. But I remember the first time I went to see him, it was really funny because first of all, as my surname is George, she kind of got a bit confused. The French don't think George, it's a man. She thought she was going to be seeing a bloke, and she thought she was going to get rid of him in 10 minutes. I was still there 2 hours later.
And thus you are friends.
And she was doing all sorts of things. I mean, that stage she had not yet got her Fougères vineyard. She's now very much settled in Fougères, and her daughter has taken over the vineyard that's the other side of the hills from Fougères, and in the Haute Valley de l'Aude. So she was making some delicious Pinot Noir, which is a great variety you don't find commonly in the Languedoc because it's too hot. And she also had some Arnaise, and no, not Arnaise. She had Petit Arvine, a little bit of Riesling, and she's a very thoughtful winemaker. And it was a brilliant afternoon.
Awesome. And again, just sort of defining, is Fougères neighbouring to Languedoc or part of
Fougères is only part of the Languedoc. I'm very enthusiastic about Fougères because my French home is 2 villages away.
Oh, yeah. It's your second home, right?
Yes, my second
home. You live there part of the year?
I live there, yes, sort of. Well, with Brexit, it's a bit complicated, but say 2-3 months a year, possibly.
Right. That must be it must have been a strong advantage to you in writing about the region to have a home there. So
yes, I mean, we just sort of discovered the region very much when I was writing the wines of the south of France, because in the course of that we were staying from Draguignan in Provence around to Perpignan, and then we focused on the fact that the area we really liked was Pézenas, Clermont-Lérault, which is sort of Fougères, Saint-Chinian wine-wise.
Okay.
We thought about perhaps going a house outside London. If you wake up in London, it's pouring with rain. It's going to be pouring with rain in Sussex. But if you get on a plane to Montpellier, hour and a half flying time as opposed to an hour and a half driving time, the weather's likely to be better. Not always, but likely to be.
Huh. Well, that's optimistic. That's great. I'd move there too if I could. Was there one particularly challenging interview that you did while you were writing the book, researching it?
Nothing. I mean, I think most of the Languedoc wine growers are very happy to talk. I've never really had a problem. The one problem I would have loved to have interviewed Laurent Vaillé from La Grange des Pères, but he just never responded to interview requests. So
is he famous in the region? Why did you want to interview him?
Now he's died, but he was very famous. He was one of the pioneers, neighbor of Mascassac, but he just he was rather reclusive and just. I had seen him earlier, but this time it just silence.
Yeah. Well,
shame.
I know what you're talking about. Some winemakers just don't come out of their cave.
Yes. Most do, I think. If they decided that you're sort of serious and.
Yeah. Now you've mentioned climate change a few times. Things are warming up around the globe. How are winemakers in the Languedoc responding to that challenge? What are they doing? What are they changing?
I think there's research on different grape varieties. I mean, that Syrah was introduced as a cépage améliorateur, but actually Syrah in very hot weather doesn't actually perform that well. It gets rather sort of too bit ripe and jammy and sort of a bit too tapenade, black olive sort of characters. So I think there is one of the source of experimentation is what other grape varieties might be, and also the realization that actually Carignan and Cinsault do actually work rather well in the Languedoc. So that's
because of the warmth.
I think, because I think with climate change, not necessarily, yes, it's getting hotter. I mean, Roussillon is the area that's really suffered from lack of water this year. The Languedoc's not been so bad. And you can't irrigate, you could irrigate on the plains, but the hillside vineyards, it's too steep to irrigate. In any case, there's no water available. But I think the other thing is that actually that the weather is actually less regular. Once upon a time, at school I was taught Mediterranean climate was hot, dry summers, mild, wet winters. And the Languedoc could expect a storm amongst the 2 bank holidays of the summer, so the 14th of July and the 15th of August. There was likely to be, a bit of a downpour, and that would refresh everything. But these days that doesn't always happen. And this year it's actually been quite complicated because they've had the weather was a bit cool in September, so they've had rather a drawn-out harvest, waiting for things to ripen. And then, some drought earlier in the year. So And then, they have had frost. I mean, I go to Chablis quite frequently. I've written a lot about Chablis, but the one time I've actually seen frost-damaged vineyards was in the Languedoc, and I'm out walking. I knew the temperature had dropped the previous night. And I thought, what are all these sort of burnt brown leaves? And that's realised frost. A line that one side of the road had been frosted and the other hadn't. And it's a horrible sight to see. And there are other hazards, of course, hailstorms, which again is a horrible thing to see in a vineyard that looks as though a troop of goats has gone through. But actually it's hail, isn't it? And it's everything, all sort of leaves and twigs on the ground. It's
Yeah, they're saying it's global weirding now, like just these weird episodes
of warming. I mean, I think in London our rain is much heavier than it used to be, for instance. Whereas it's those sort of changes, more erratic.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your research, what surprising or little-known historical facts about winemaking in the Languedoc did you discover?
Don't actually anything particularly comes to mind. I pondered that question and nothing sort of leapt to. I mean, I think the history is quite interesting from the point of view, what happened in 1907 when they're protesting about. Well, they were protesting about what they thought was fraud, but the main problem actually was overproduction, and that actually did make people start thinking about the early controls, which then paved the way to Appellation Contrôlée.
The rules, the AOC.
Yes, which the first ones in the Languedoc were 1936, 38.
Oh, okay, much later.
That was for fortified wines. So the Muscat, Muscat de Frontignan, Muscat de Meval. The first table wines didn't happen until 1948, which were Fitou and Claret du Languedoc.
Oh, really? They didn't have dry table wines till 1948.
And then they stood alone until 1982 when Faugère and Saint-Chinian got their appellation. Côte du Languedoc came in 1985 with what they called terroir, which were some of the sort of particular islands of quality, like Clap, what else? And the other villages, there was Saint-Dréziry, Saint-Christol, some of which were in Montpérou, Saint-Satanin. And then some of those villages are now trying to establish their own appellations.
Right.
It's all still in a state of flux. Somebody said Burgundy been doing it for 400 years. We're relatively newcomers to the appellation game. And then, of course, you've got all the EGP, the geographical indications, which the big one is Pays d'Oc, which, of course, those are the ones that really allow for experimentation in the area.
And does IGP, right?
Yes.
Is it? Yes. Does it cover all of Languedoc or beyond that?
Oh yeah, can we cover? Well, there are AGP all over France. So the big Languedoc one is Pays d'Oc, which covers everything. It goes into Roussillon, and then you've got individual areas, some of which are administrative, and some are a sort of a geographical feature.
So they have far fewer rules than
they have fewer rules.
The AOCs
and higher yields.
Okay. And that is why, or is that's a big contributor to why you say Languedoc is a hotbed of experimentation? I
think yes, because the people who don't want to conform to the rules, so they can try different grape variety. Then you've also got, of course, Vin de France. So if you really don't want to conform to the rules, you just produce Vin de France, and
So it's an even higher level. Yeah.
When it's the reputation of your name sells your wine, and I tend to think if you come across Vin de France in the Languedoc from a grower with a certain reputation, it's going to be interesting. You may not like it, but there will be a reason why it's not conforming for whatever reason. So that's interesting.
It reminds me of like what Sassicaia did in Italy. It ignored all the rules until they finally gave them their own DOC because the wine was so great.
Yes.
Yeah. And before we keep going with experimentation, on the history bit, how did the monastic houses contribute to winemaking in the Languedoc?
I don't think their role is any different from anywhere else in France. That the monasteries needed wine, so vineyards were planted around the monasteries.
Right. I
don't think they necessarily had a big part in actual anything experimental or new. They just made sure.
They were so fundamental in Burgundy.
Exactly. Chablis, the monastery of Pontigny, is actually key to its development.
Right. Okay. And the history of Canal du Midi, what is that? What is that about?
Well, that's sort of to do with communications. But if before the Canal du Midi, if you shipped wine out of Sète, you wanted to go to Northern Europe, it's got to go through the Straits of Gibraltar. Well, so, but once you've got the Canal du Midi was built, it linked up with the river systems that took you to Bordeaux. So
Okay, so it's a man-made canal that
it's a
shipped the
man-made
wines.
canal. It is, and
Okay.
it's an extraordinary feat of engineering. I mean, there's a outside Béziers. There's a flight of 7 locks, and then another 2 that then attach another river to it. And there's one where if you're driving into Toulouse, you actually drive under it on the motorway. You
Oh,
sort of
really?
look up, and there's this large thing. You think, well, that's Canal du Midi, because it's quite shallow, because it's designed for barges. So it's not as
Okay.
deep, but it's
But still, to have a barge going over your head as you're driving under it,
unnerving.
oh, it'll be
Or
a
just
little
water
unnerving.
everywhere, I suppose.
Yeah. And how do you think the Languedoc's culinary traditions have influenced wine styles and wine pairings?
I don't really think of the Languedoc as being great on culinary traditions. You know, it doesn't have that sort of reputation like Lyon or Burgundy. I mean, it's very much, I think, fresh food. You know, so obviously fish,
Yeah.
seafood, oysters, because you've got the Étang, the in-water lagoons where oysters are cultivated. Obviously, lots of olive oil features. I think it's fresh vegetables. I think and seasonal stuff. So there are areas that are known, melons, asparagus, that sort of thing.
Do you have any favorite pairings?
Well, I suppose you think, good Languedoc moment is if you like oysters. There's the little village of Bouzigue, which is on the Étang de Thau, so you can sit eating oysters, looking out at the oyster beds, where your oysters probably came from yesterday. So that's quite nice. Wash it
sounds
down
nice.
with some Picpoul de Pinot, which is the vineyard around the Étang de Thau. So
Right.
that's a good moment.
That sounds like a beautiful moment. Now, you highlight the importance of white and rosé wines in the Languedoc's transformation. What's happening? So we always think of the Languedoc as big, full-bodied reds. We don't think of it for whites and rosés. What's happening with those?
Well, you realise it produces a lot more rosé than Provence. And
wow.
yes, no, it does. It's at least twice as much. It might be more, which tends to get.
Is that just because it's such a large region?
It's because it's a large area. Yes, there's quite a lot
Yeah.
of. So yes, whereas Provence is actually quite small in comparison. I mean, it follows the Provence trend of very pale roses on the whole. And I think there's some good ones, and the 1 or 2 estates that do actually specialise in make the rosé quite special. And the white one.
Is it true that the paler the rosé, the better the wine? I've always thought that was a
I
myth.
think that it also might be how good you are at filtering any colour out.
Yes. Okay. You've got
A bit of
filtering
charcoal
going
filtering
on.
that will lower the colour if you want it really pale. But it's
Right.
also, it is also care of winemaking. So obviously not allowing your juice to oxidise. So there's the people being
Right.
the technological aspects of making rosé. Sort of
Sure.
retaining the
And what
fresh-
about the white wines?
The
of
white, I
Languedoc?
think white wines. They originally weren't important. In the fact, the early appellations were red, but so like Saint-Chinian, Faugère both now have a white aspect of their appellation, which wasn't created or recognised till 2004. And you've got the Terrasse du Larzac, which is one of the cooler areas of the Languedoc. That's really, they say, enormous potential for white wine, which they are recognising, but they have yet to create the appellation for it. But it's in the pipeline. It will happen.
Right. And yet, climate change, everything's warming up. How do they keep those white wines fresh?
Yes, I'm not quite. I mean, that to me actually, with Roussillon, is actually to be more of a conundrum because I think Roussillon was really quite hot, and yet they produce some wonderful white wines. I love minerality, those sort of focused, sort of good acidity with Chablis, and you can find wines like that in Roussillon. And you think, how do they manage it? I think altitude could probably play a bit. So the Terrasse du Larzac, it's quite, and cooling winds and. Good
Sure.
winemaking.
And picking
The
early,
white
perhaps.
varieties. I think again we talked about red Carignan, but there's Carignan Blanc and Carignan Gris, which are
Oh, I didn't know that.
possible.
Okay.
Yes, I mean Carignan Gris is hardly recognised by the authorities. I know a friend was trying to sort of, you've got to do your yield declarations for your harvest, and she's trying to sort of declare her Carignan Gris, and the woman said, "Don't you mean Blanc?" And Katie thought, "This is probably not worth an argument." I just, sorry, I made a mistake. And then Terre Noir. Terre is another one that's rather disappeared. Bourboulin, which is very good in La Clappe. It responds to the marine environment of La Clappe, which is sort of almost surrounded by sea. So,
Okay. And Carignan Gris, is that supposed to be like Pinot Gris or is it a rosé?
pink. It's slightly pink.
Slightly pink. Okay.
Because,
Okay.
that's what Gris means. So you've got Carignan Blanc and Carignan Gris with a little bit of colour. And I think
Right.
even Terry can be Gris. I think some of these old grape varieties are being reassessed and looked at. And
Sure. Everything does over time. And what prompted the shift from mass-produced table wines, low-cost, cheap to higher quality appellation wines?
right, probably the fall in consumption of wine in France. You think, well, France used to drink a phenomenal amount per capita, the
Right.
population. So I think, and then probably wine growers perhaps coming out of the cooperative, they want to do something more individual. There's a recognition that they actually had some really good vineyard land. How good the terroir was. I think it's a kind of reassessment that they just that producing sort of red plonk really wasn't the way forward.
Right.
Let's see what we actually can do. It's sort of the pioneers of quality. Looking like, go back to Georges Bertrand. Let's try aging my wine in a barrel, and he wasn't alone to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And
so
that's
people are
sort of snowball. And then I suppose there are a lot
sure.
of newcomers attracted to the area because land prices are not that expensive. And you can buy vineyards, which you can't do in, say, Chablis or Bordeaux. You can, but buying a vineyard in Chablis is pretty tricky.
right. And I think if people are drinking less but better, winemakers
exactly.
are going
There
to
was
follow
that part of
suit.
that. Yes, that trend.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about the interplay between tradition and innovation in the book. What's the significance of amphorae, those clay jugs,
I think
and
that's
other
one of the
ancient
new
techniques?
things. Yeah, it's one of the new things people are trying because I think they're aware of how wine is made in other parts of the world, and there's more interest in Georgia now, which of course is where they use amphora, quavery traditionally. And people
Right,
are
the
trying to-
country, not the state.
Yes, the country, not the state. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Right.
I think-
And so was the amphorae, were they part of the Languedoc tradition,
No,
or
not
this
at
is
all, no.
just a new
This is a new thing, and eggs
Okay.
are another one that people are looking at as sort of interesting.
concrete eggs?
Concrete eggs, yeah.
Okay,
Maybe
so
somebody put a
what
wooden egg
does
as well.
what did those things do? Like the clay amphorae, how does that
Well, I
change
think
the
it's a very
style of the wine?
neutral. It's a neutral way of aging your wine.
Okay.
Some of them are buried, so that's going to be good for sort of temperature control in the cellar. If it's underground, it's not going to get really hot. Eggs, I'm told that you don't have to lees stir because of the shape of the egg, there is a very gentle movement of the wine. So
Oh, okay. So the lees are doing their own thing
the lees
inside
are doing
there.
their own thing. They're just getting on the doing it.
And so the lees, for those who may not know, are the spent yeast cells,
Yes,
dead
sort of
yeast cells,
fine.
and they add a creamy texture to the wine.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah. And what about the emergence of, well, we talked about this with Gerard Bertrand, but what's happening with organic and biodynamic winemaking in Languedoc? Is it a really big trend now across the board?
I think it's quite important. Yeah.
Okay. And there,
I'm sorry.
that's
somebody tried
no,
to
that's
ring me.
okay. That's the
I'll ignore
Languedoc
him.
calling you now.
No, it's actually my plumber. Yeah, so we stop. That's all right.
Okay, no worries. How do you envision the Languedoc's wine scene evolving over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
That's an interesting question. I think the vineyard areas will decline. So there's a certain element of overproduction. I think one of the problems, if you like, of the Languedoc is there are people who make lovely wine, but they have no idea how to market it. A lot of people, sort of say to me, "Oh, the British market is so difficult." And then you look at, say, an importer. He's looking at he wants to import, say, Terrasse du Larzac, but there is a limit to the number of interesting producers from the Terrasse du Larzac you can have. So there are quite a lot of people doing similar things, and is there a market for all these people? And I can think of people who are very good at marketing. Their wine is sound, but it may not be great, but they know how to market it. Whereas the small guy who's making some really exciting wine, but he just doesn't know how to market it, so he's kind of rather stuck.
Right, right.
And I suppose also somebody else said there are two strands to the Languedoc of the individual wine producers. You've got the people who perhaps have come to it, and it's a serious profession. They've got a lot of vineyards, and they they've got a lot of quantity of wine to sell. Then you've got the people who have come in, perhaps a second career, and perhaps just a small niche vineyard that they don't have so much wine to sell, and it's just not. I'm not going to say it's a hobby, but it's a completely different scale. And how do you serve those two? And then the cooperatives, the good cooperatives, still have their role. In the village like Montpellier, where I've got they're talking to, he said, there are 50 families in the village who I employ.
Wow.
Or who are giving grapes, giving grapes to me so they, so the village economy, can depend on a good cooperative that knows how to, sell its wine and run a good operation.
And what do you think is the biggest threat to the success of Languedoc wines going forward?
Ooh. Pass.
Okay. Maybe there are none.
Yes, well there's threats. I think whether it's I think what their competition is, they're competing with other countries. I suppose probably threat is competition, possibly, or climate change. Natural phenomena that.
If they can't keep up with that, or water becomes a serious issue.
I think Roussillon more than Languedoc is suffering seriously from lack of water.
Sure. Are you optimistic about the future of Languedoc wines?
Yes, I am. Yes, I would like to be optimistic. Yes, I think there's lots going on there. Lots of
Because do you find them? I know it's hard to generalize about everyone, but do you find it a region of resilience?
I think so. Yes, I think probably actually the climate and we talked about the Garrigue, but it's quite wild countryside. I think that if you live in a little village up in the hills, that's going to give you a certain resilience. You have to.
Sure. Just battling against the crazy winds and the scrubby land and trying to make a living from it. Yeah. Huh. And if someone were to visit the Languedoc region for the first time, what advice would you give them?
Ooh, because I was wondering where to start on that one. It's really what sort of wine do you want to taste? I think one advice actually, if you want to go to see a wine grower, make an appointment. Don't just turn up. Then you'll get a much better welcome. But if you just sort of
they don't have open tasting rooms the way they do in North America?
They might be doing other things. They might not be open. And don't turn up at lunchtime, which is 12 till 2 in France. I know one friend was given rather short shrift by a good friend who's normally very welcoming, but she did turn up at 2 minutes to 12 unannounced. That is not appreciated. Then I think you think, what would you like to explore? Where have you been? Perhaps base yourself. Pézenas is a lovely small town, which has got my sister Languedoc, and it's quite central to visiting various other appellations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are there particular estates you'd recommend visiting?
Oh, I could recommend lots of friends. If I was I suppose it also depends, do you speak French or not? Which is another factor.
Is that important? Is that critical? Or is there...
Well, I think there are quite a lot of people who don't, who probably their command of French, of the command of English is possibly not great, or they're much more comfortable speaking French than English. So you'll get more information from, if you can speak French.
Somewhat conversant.
But don't be put off, there are people who speak English. And I suppose my problem is because I tend to speak French, I'm not actually quite sure who speaks good English.
And is the Languedoc warm year-round? I mean, is it a nice winter vacation for those of us who live in northern climes, like in, February?
I was there Christmas last year. Christmas Day was a brilliant blue sunny day, and it was warm enough to have a picnic on the beach. I put my toes in the Mediterranean.
Nice.
But then, a couple of days later, it was rather grey, and then the day after that, it was sort of sunny again. So, it's a bit hit and miss, is what I say. Yes, it can be, but it's a bit hit and miss. Things are probably quieter, in the winter. It's really sort of more buzzy in the summer. Then, if you don't like sort of summer crowds, I suppose probably spring and autumn may be more reliable times to visit.
Yeah. Okay. And what are the key messages that you hope that people take away from your book?
Oh, try the wines. I want to encourage people to drink the wines of the Languedoc. If you're unfamiliar with them, please explore them. See what your local wine merchant has. I mean, I suppose is there a lot of Languedoc wine available in Canada?
There's a fair amount. Gerard Bertrand is very big here, but there's Les Jumelles. There's a number of different
Yes.
producers here. Yeah, it's well represented for
Oh,
sure.
that's good. Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, I
Yeah.
would say explore.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Have you discovered anything new that you would add to a new edition of the book?
I was thinking about that. There are obviously new wine growers, but also people
Right.
move on. So there are quite a few people in my book who are no longer making wine, which is extremely irritating of them to sort of change. It's out of date almost immediately it's published, you know. I think I'd be looking at who's sort of new, how things have changed. But I think now
Sure.
it's evolving gently rather than dramatically.
Right, right. Okay. And just a few quick questions to round up. Maybe tell us about a favorite childhood food and what you would pair it with today as an adult.
Well, my first reaction to that one was baked beans, which I now can't remember the last time I ate baked beans out of a tin. So, and I'm not.
I like beans. What would you pair it with?
Well, I think you'd actually probably go with with a lovely bottle of quite simple Languedoc wine. I mean, I would think de Mélioli Taillefer's Les Collines, which is her entry level wine, and that would
Okay.
go well. I think baked beans would be.
Is that a
quite-
red or a white?
It's red, red. Yes, I'd have
Red,
red wine, I
okay.
think, with baked beans, or I suppose roast chicken. Then you'd have something a bit
Oh.
more serious.
Comfort food. What would you pair with that?
Well, again, sort of, yes, a good Languedoc. I suppose when I look at a Languedoc wine list, I tend to look and see who, of my friends, whose wine am I going to drink this evening, rather than specifically a Saint-Chinian or a Fougère. So,
Sure. Okay. And if you could share a bottle of wine with anyone outside of the wine world, living or dead, who would that be?
well, I thought I always quite like to meet Jane Austen, because I do rather
yeah.
like her books. I remember
The
reading
author,
Pride and
yeah.
Prejudice at school and falling in love instantly with Mr. Darcy.
Oh, yes, Mr. Darcy. I
And
love
then seeing
Colin
the film
Firth
with
in the
Colin
movie.
Firth.
Yes, exactly. What would you ask Jane Austen?
What would I ask her? Yes, I hadn't really thought as far as that. Well, I suppose how you go about writing your your novels. What are your inspirations? And then, of course, what
Sure.
wine would you like to drink? If we were
Yes,
having-
what if
What
she
else?
bounced that question back to you? Which wine would you suggest you
what would
open
I
together?
choose? Depends what we were eating.
Okay. Maybe we're eating something from one of her books. I don't know.
Yes, exactly.
If
I
she
was
was
thinking, what did she write about? Yes, reading. What food she mentions in her book? I can't remember.
Yeah. No problem.
But I think
All right.
yes,
Pardon me?
Languedoc wine would go well with sort of something from sort of a plate of
Maybe a roast pheasant or something.
Exactly, like some roast. Yes,
holiday.
definitely pheasant. I think pheasant and long. I've certainly when I've cooked pheasant, I've served Languedoc wines with pheasant.
Yeah, that sounds great. Rosemary, this is terrific. As we wrap up our conversation, is there anything you wanted to mention before we conclude here?
I think we've covered the ground pretty well. Thank you, Natalie.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rosemary. How can we best find you online and your books?
My books are now published via the Académie du Vin, and
Yes.
online I write a blog which is rosemary-george-mw.com.
Okay, great. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes so that people can find you and your books. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure chatting, and we'll have to get together in person next time for a glass of wine.
I hope so. That would be fun when you come to
Yeah, it
London.
would be. Yes.
Anyway, thank you. It's been
All
fun.
right. Thank you, Rosemary. Cheers.